The views and opinions of the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
Good morning this morning and welcome back to Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, your station for fresh news, smart talk all day. It is Tuesday the 1st. Last year this time we were talking International Women's Day and all things women and eradicating violence against women and girls. We're going to continue that conversation throughout this month. There's lots to talk about. But today is Tuesday with Mr. Mark Palmer. Good morning, Mr. Palmer.
Good morning, Erin.
How you doing?
Right, y'all.
Good. Because as we could see around the world, there's conflict and turmoil. And we can talk about some of that. There's flooding and military unrest in the Congo that continues. In Ethiopia, political unrest, it continues. And then we know what's going on in the Ukraine. So we're going to talk about a bit of those things. I just got one or two housekeeping notes. If you guys remember, WhatsApp has On the Clock has a group and number. WhatsApp has a new group you could tune into. We want you to share your news, your tips, and your hot stories with us. Things that you think the Bahamian public need to know. And that WhatsApp account is 1-242-428-0719. You can go to the On the Clock Facebook account or page to find the link to join the group. If you want to join the conversation today, you can text us on the Guardian Radio text line. That's 422-GR96. That's 422-4796. Remember, that's powered by BTC. Standard text rates apply. Or you could call us at 323-6232, 325-454259. Now, I have to say to the person that texted me yesterday, I just made this announcement yesterday, and by midway through the show, I had tons of texts. I promised them I would touch on the thing today. And this texter said, look, everyone is an individual with rights and feelings. Slavery was abolished a long time ago, and women are not chattel. And that was a texter chiming in on the marital rape GBV discussion, because we talked about it not just being a woman-centered issue. The texter also shared that VAT on breadbasket items is truly criminal. And, well, you know what? I think that what is very problematic is making these sort of massive and significant tax regime shifts without taking the time to explain to the people who you taxing why you're making the shift and how that shift is intended to benefit them or impact them in the short term, the medium term, and the long term.
Just consultation. That's the question. Or was it something that came from above?
Right.
Down onto the people.
And so, take this moment to let's empower civil society organizations and understand that even some of these processes in government are not government-led or government-centered. And it really requires civil society groups and affected, impacted, or the vulnerable communities in question. It requires you, them, to step up and start carving out the way. And we've seen that the disabled community, the community of people with disabilities, they have taken the lead in this country in the social justice and advocacy space in terms of telling the government what they need, building out bills and policies and drafting these things and presenting them to the government, finding the resources to bring in consultants and experts to engage the government. You know, we could say from the social justice world, everybody, all of us, even 20 years in advocacy, Erin, Greene, have to say thank you to the disabilities and disabled community for leading the way and taking the government's hand and leading them ahead. If y'all don't know it, but the disabled community was the first advocacy space, first NGO, first social justice space or collection of NGOs to host a conference on the Sustainable Development Goals. They took the lead, they took the charge, and so it's up to us to begin taking the lead. And on an issue like VAT on medicine, right, it is appalling. It is appalling. It is unconscionable. But we as citizens can also sit down and begin drafting ideas and policies, right? We can engage with the pharmaceutical community, the local community here to find strategies to make medicine more accessible. I have a friend that just told me, look, when I got here 10 years ago, I was paying something like $4 for a dose of a medication a month or a cycle. And now I am paying close to $30 for it with no real explanation and no engagement with not consumers, patients, right? There's a different type of consumer with patients on how to prepare for the next weeks. Right? Patients needing to go to doctors, or doctors needing to sit with patients and say, listen, we need to set up a regime on how you're going to stretch this medication. Because I know you're not supposed to stretch it, but I know you're not supposed to stop taking it either. Right? And people need real assistance with this type of...
It's this advocacy again, right? I mean, the good example was in today's paper. I think you're going to refer to it, right? The women's groupings that have come together.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of them. It's like 34 groups. Rather than working in silos, they came together and demanding their action to protect vulnerable communities. That's the kind of thing that needs to happen for all these to be there. So kudos to them.
Absolutely, for stepping into that space. And then I would encourage them and to say, like, so now if you take a look at today's Guardian, that same letter, I mean, in today's Tribune, that same letter was in yesterday's Guardian. When you take a look at the letter and you see the list of names, I want to remind those women that you are more powerful than you think that you are as well. And that with networking within your spaces and communities, we don't need to ask the government for a shelter. We could figure out how to build 2 or 3 shelters right now for women, for boys, because we know that boys are particularly vulnerable in this instance because of policy and cultural attitudes, right? A focus on building these shelters. And I know someone like the Chargé d'Affaires from the U.S., Usha Pitts, who's in the paper today, talking, in the paper today, we see a presentation of resources and funding to the prison and to other spaces. The U.S. Embassy is down, man. They are committed to working with and providing access to U.S. organizations that work with issues around citizen security, citizen justice. And I'm going to tell you, yesterday I said to a caller, Mark, look, no, all of these issues are linked. Let me show you how. All of these issues are linked. And if we can begin to make way in the gender-based violence discussion, the eradicating violence against women, boys, and girls discussion, if we focus on the housing issue and understand the difficulties that young men have in positive development if they're homeless, when they're homeless with their mothers and made to feel, not by their mothers, but by their circumstances, that they have to be man now and step up, right? All of these issues are linked in some way. And so I want to encourage those women, to really see and understand the potential, the capacity of your power and your networking and your relationships. And let's do this.
I agree. It'd be great to see other groupings come together and do the same thing, for their particular issues and sectors. But you're right. Everything's linked together. There's no one approach that's going to solve all our problems. It all needs to be done.
Yeah. But I'm going to say, look here, let's start with housing. Mm-hmm. Let's start with housing. We have a housing crisis, and it's directly and indirectly impacting everything going on.
You have it all over the world. I mean, in other countries, because housing is a failed market. If you look at capitalism, things like that are failed markets, and we need to step in, or civil society needs to step in to solve that problem, and that's subsidizing housing. And so my sister bought a home, and it was half subsidized by the local council, so she could become a homeowner, and then she would have an agreement to pay them out over 20 years. But that allowed her to get onto the ladder.
Right, absolutely. And an interesting stat from a few years ago, it may have changed, but I doubt that it has. There were more abandoned homes in the U.S. than there were unhoused or homeless people.
Yeah, plenty here too. If you go through the neighborhoods around where I live, I would say a third of the homes are not lived in.
Yeah. And so we know that our government understands the sort of link between home ownership and the sense of security, whether you own the home or not, particularly for young people, sense of security that I am safe where I live and I wouldn't have to be rooted up for any reason other than maybe a hurricane, right? That there's a link between positive individual and collective development, right? So the development of the young man or the young woman and the community development, right? And so these low-cost housing programs were rooted in this idea, this link to home ownership, personal identity, and community and national identity, right?
And it's not even home ownership. There are pilot studies in certain communities in the States where they got homeless people off the street. And the cost of just accommodating them was not huge. You're talking about $700 to $1,000 a month. But the savings of social costs, then you got somebody in a space, then you could deal with their issues. You get a therapist in there or whatever the social needs are. Mm-hmm. And they found that their budget increased as a result of making those investments. And so it's counterintuitive that spending a little bit in homing people, creating homes for people, subsidized housing, actually saves a huge amount of the social services budget.
Listen, and even in the topic that we're going to discuss today, there's a link there as well. Like they discuss the links between homelessness, low education levels, poverties, broken or dysfunctional economies, and citizens' ability to respond to climate change, right?
All linked.
Yeah, I just find it so important, right, that we find the links between these things, and we realize that housing is one of those important things. And it's important for me, right, because I grew up a privileged Bahamian. I ain't never, ever once as a child had to think about where I was going to live. Mm-hmm. In fact, I grew up like the same way we grew up with this idea that your parents could beat you and ain't nobody could do nothing about it, right? I grew up with the idea that, no, somebody have to house you. Your parents can't put you out like that. You got to be housed.
And we just don't know. I mean, it's kind of swept under the carpet. I know when we were doing the youth build pilot, we had some of the students and, we were assessing them, and there'd be 8 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment, 4 adults and 4 minors, and you can see the issues that could potentially create, not just the overcrowding side of it. And so how you could concentrate during the day when you probably didn't get to sleep that night, and so it
compounds
shocking.
itself.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. So listen, I don't know if I even got into the housekeeping. Listen, Dare Beaches and Parks, it's great to see your teams back to work. As soon as they've gotten back to work, it's great to see that. However, we're going to need a little coordination. We're going to need some signs, some detour signs, and some road works or men working ahead signs, because this is the second morning in the row that I've been hit in the head by a flying object released from a weed whacker. And I want to ask the people at beaches and parks, why would you have people weed whacking at peak traffic times? Please, these people, they want to wake. I know that. Even when they look like they don't want to wake, that's a Bahamian aesthetic. That's for if war ever hit, that we gonna rely on that. It's gonna be a biggie. But they need to be managed. People need to be led. They need to be managed. You need to show them what's expected of them until they get it, until they get an understanding, and then they could project that from themselves. Oh, the boss ain't here, but I know what we need to do next. Oh, there was a hiccup here. Okay, we could go left until that's resolved. People need that type of guidance, man. Please help them out so that I don't get pork in my head by little rocks. The way that my insurance is set up, 2 people going to have to die with me for me to be able to afford it, okay? Mark, I got some text here. Text says, shout out to you, Lady E. You keep it real, courteous, and engaging. So good on you. Thank you. Thank you. Another text that says, Erin, when it comes to women, you are so biased and involved with women that even on International Men's Day, your topic was how men should speak to women. No women without men. Oh, wow. I mean, you know what I've come to find? That a lot of men are invested in relationships with women, like as individuals and at a collective level. That a lot of men want to work towards building better relationships with women. Like a lot of men say, hey, it's not that I'm a heterosexual and I'm attracted to women, and thus I sort of want to make sure that I could always engage. I understand how to engage with them, and I'm hip, It's that the planet is 50% women. And so even when we're talking about men, we're also talking about women. And that's sort of the angle that I approach it from Texter. Yeah. But I hope you noticed that during National Women's Week, we created lots of space for David Williams to come in and speak from International Men's Day Committee, because he understands the extent to which men's relationships with women impact their development, whether they are intimate, sexually intimate, romantic, right, platonic, familial. And so, I think, despite what you think, men are really invested in how they relate to women as a part of their own development. You know what I'm saying? They really get where you're going, Texter. But that's okay, because we're going somewhere completely different. I got another text here, Mark. Good morning. Regarding abandoned homes, one second. It was quite interesting when I spoke to a banker about this. I asked him, why is it that so many foreclosed homes are rotting away? Can't the bank sell them for a reduced price rather than letting them go to waste? Do this. I found it hard to believe, because after going through the bidding process, it seems that it's anything but that. Banks often come back to you and say you need to bid higher. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can push you. Especially what I want to know is, a bank staff in those particular areas, are they working on commission? Or do they get a base pay? Because if their pay is based on how much they can sell and how much income that they could generate, then a part of their job description is trying to get you to spend more money. That doesn't necessarily make them bad people. It just means that they're trapped in a capitalist system.
The business model, that's all it is.
But listen,
but there are a lot but it's not just in those neighborhoods. And when I'm driving in the over-the-hill communities, a lot of derelict homes, that are shuttered up or just completely derelict. And people could be living there. I'm talking about hundreds of homes that I pass by most days.
That's interesting as well, Mark, because there's a number of dynamics is at play, right? So we have homes where the person who owned the home died without a clear will, an expression of the dissolution of a state, who gets what. And so families are trying to figure it out. Then we got another problem. We have a judicial system that is imploding on itself. It's falling away, like it just melting away, because there are these backlogs and people can't get to lawyers. And I don't know how hard lawyers, like what you all have to do if you work in a 45-hour workday, Lawyers are hard to find. People are constantly complaining about not being able to get these wills probated and get these processes finalized, right? So there's a dysfunction in that judicial space. And then we have an overarching issue that this is going to sound weird, right? But death makes us so uncomfortable. Death makes us so uncomfortable that we will not and are unable to decisively dive into these issues and demand movement, demand clarity from the government, demand intervention if we need it, demand policies that will straighten these things out. Because at the end of the day, we are so psychologically affected, right? Negatively by death in any conversation about it, the thought that we're going to die one day, that we don't have any of these conversations. And we don't understand the extent to which we are dishonoring the dead, that we are creating dysfunctional cultures and practices, right? And so a lot of these homes are abandoned because clear title cannot be established. Family dynamics and relations become dysfunctional. We got a little crookedness going on, right, in these spaces. But we need to realize that a child and an individual's dignity attached to having a safe place to live. Do we know how many young girls around this town cannot go to bed safely knowing that there's no chance, there's zero chance that they're going to be molested in their sleep because they're safe. They know who's going to be in their house when they go to sleep and when they wake up. Yeah. There's so many, and young boys, you know.
But there are some simple policy issues. When I lived in the UK, in urban areas, you very rarely find any derelict homes or homes that aren't maintained because there are laws in place requiring the owner to repair them, or the local council steps in, does the job for them, and then when the owner sells, the new purchaser has to pay for it. So,
right.
So there are things that we could do to create a policy to assist that process.
Right. And
for the common good.
And that deals with all of the bickering and the back and forth between buyer and seller. Look here, the government can fix it up. You want to buy it? When you buy it, that can be the cost. And the work is done. But the housing, the need for housing in Great Britain is so great.
Same issues.
To manage crime and poverty and other issues, the council realizes that they're invested in solving the housing issue outside of people need places to live. It's There's so many examples we could pull on. I got another text there, Mark, just following up on the conversation. Additionally, he mentioned, and so this is from the texter that referenced the bank. Additionally, he mentioned that there is a Homeowners Act that seeks to protect the homeowners so that they can get a portion back from the sale of these homes when they are foreclosed. I found that counterproductive since this plan doesn't seem to be working. It contradicts the fact that he said that they do try to sell homes at the lowest cost and basically clearly isn't working since so many homes are just rotting away. I think that that's a spoken policy, but I don't think that's happening in practice because the industry itself doesn't suggest that. But I'm hoping that move, the visit to Grand Bahama by the Prime Minister and a number of teams, they were sort of focusing on a number of things at once, but they saw the link between the unhoused situation, homeless crisis, and abandoned buildings that were readily being occupied by these people, which made them invisible, and thus less likely for the government and other stakeholders to see them and properly account for them in their policy making. I want to thank you for that texter. Oh boy, we got a number of texts. Yes, Erin, one of those weed whacker propellers launched a rock stone pebble right into the door of my vehicle, leaving a sizable dent and chipped paint. So here's what you're going to do. You can go to the insurance company. You're supposed to document it, right? Use a timestamp on your camera. You want to document their presence at the Beaches and Park team, their presence at the site, but you don't want to capture their faces. You're not trying to take pictures of people's faces. If there are any vehicles there, you want to you capture the vehicle so you could identify the team there, but get the time that they were there and the location. And you go to your insurance company and ask your insurance company whether it's worth it to economically to file, right? Because for you, it may be a matter of principle or a process, a campaign to shift policy, so you want to go through with it. But document it, talk to your insurance agent, and they'll advise you. They tell you the best police station to go to, possibly road traffic or central, one of them. And that's the way to go forward with it. Another text, please give on the clock WhatsApp number again. It is 1-242-428-0719. 1-242-428-0719. Thank you for that reminder text. This last text before we go to the break. Great show as usual. We have in Nassau from when Mr. Gibson builder homes are still occupied. So why the government don't occupying the houses before they build new houses? So listen, that's a whole bunch in that one text, and I love it. Because see, my Grammy house is made from Andrus rock, Andrus stone, and Andrus pine. And I done tell the people in my family, if they tear down that house, I want all of it. All the rock and all the wood, all the timber. I want all. See them old people house? My friend them house in Mayagwana? They just did some renovations and found a piece of wood that the house was built in 1830 something. So the tree had to have been at least 30 when it was cut down, at least minimum. And that piece of wood's still strong. Mm-hmm. And so, maybe we need to go back to old building techniques before we build new homes, because a part of the reason some of these homes are abandoned is because they're in disrepair and the people can't afford to repair them, or they're in dispute because the house was in disrepair before the mortgage even started, getting a little scruffy. Mortgage still shiny in the package. And so people can't afford to fix it and they have to leave it.
Well, look at Balcony House. That was built in 1790 on Market Street. Mm-hmm. That's still going strong.
Absolutely.
230 years old.
Yeah.
So they can last.
Yeah, they can, and we have the techniques. And if we move quickly enough, we can preserve those techniques, right? And if we feel we don't have the capacity to do it ourselves, institutions like the Smithsonian will help us. But we're going to get into this conversation. The text says, I don't know why we as a Christian nation say attack other persons like yourself because they're different instead of showing love. We must respect each other and realize we live in a democracy. It's more than that. Forget the democracy, because that's sort of a political construct that's man-made. For my religious folks, right? We live in a world where your God say, treat the people like you would treat me. You let me do the judging because I's the boss, right? So you give people, and then we live in a world where, whether you believe it or not, you control very little about your life. And we're going to talk about that a little bit after the break. So the texters, please hold on. We got to get into this topic. It's World News Tuesday, and there's lots going on in the world. Producer, if you could take us to a break. You're tuned into Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Don't go anywhere, because On the Clock with Erin Greene and Mark Palmer will be right back.
All the flowers, 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 all the flowers.
Like what you're hearing on the show? Want to support the conversation? Sponsor On the Clock today. Call Janet Lees at 302-2304. That's 302-2304. Be the solution. Sponsor On the Clock with Erin Greene, where she dissects, we discuss, and you decide.
Know how important collecting your money can be to the success of your business. Start your relationship with Fidelity today so that we can show you the many options available to you with our merchant services. From click and pay options online to merchant terminals and e-commerce options. We're here to help your business succeed. For more details, speak to one of our business development officers at 356-7764 in Nassau or 352-6676 in Freeport. Visit our website at fidelitygroup.com or visit any of our branches.
We're good for you.
Mommy, guess what I did in school today?
Hold on, sweetie. Mommy's sending a text.
But Mommy, my teacher said that you're not supposed to text and drive.
I know what I'm doing.
Oh, look, Mommy, the Smith twins. Mommy, watch out! In 2017, approximately 54 people died as a result of traffic accidents. A percentage of these fatalities occurred as a result of texting while driving. Just taking your eyes off the road for 5 seconds can increase your chance of crashing. Remember, even the smallest voice counts.
Texting. Brought to you by UB Radio and Guardian Radio 96.9.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, Nassau, Bahamas.
Young girls think they're everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? All the flowers, all the flowers, yeah, all the flowers, all the flowers, yeah, all the flowers, all the flowers, where all the young girls fall.
Good morning and welcome back to Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. You're on the clock with Erin, Greene, and Mark Palmer, my co-host on this World News Tuesday. And it didn't seem like we were deep into world news just now, but we were. And that's what I hope to do with this segment, is to find stories that also are very relevant for the Bahamas or to the Bahamas. Now, I had two sort of stories to talk about this morning. The first is the Ukraine matter, and the second is actually, I was so shocked to see it on the front of The Guardian this morning. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about climate change this morning. I just want to reference it briefly. So I was doing some research on Ukraine. I wanted to find interesting stories and sort of coincidental or things that we don't really think are important in the midst of war. And I saw this story about an Afghan family who had fled to Ukraine, and they were forced to migrate again. They were forced to flee again because of this conflict. And I thought, wow, migration. And so I'm searching, and then I find a story about, I think, a African family of a nomadic culture who are being defined as climate refugees now, right? And so their whole migratory patterns have shifted because of the impact of climate change on their environments. And so then this story popped up about the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's recent report and study. And doing that, I realized there is a Bahamian who is a co-author in the study, right? And her name is Adele Thomas of the University of the Bahamas and Climate Analytics. I was trying to get in touch with Adele to get her on to join our conversation this morning. So I think maybe what we could do, Mark, in limited time, is I'm going to try and schedule that for another week.
A great idea. UB has its own department that deals with climate change. So I think that was 2019. Yeah, it's staffed by her, and it deals with these particular issues. So it's great to see that they're having an impact. Yeah,
and I guess that's climate analytics. That's what it's called. Right, absolutely. I mean, so it's so important that we are a part of these discussions. Not just that you let us register and sign in on the Zoom link and put a question in the chat group, but small islanders And people who have experienced forced migration, whether contemporarily or historically, right? They should always be centered in these conversations.
Well, we could become migrants one day, Erin. And that's the sad thing when you look at the prediction. I mean, the worst case is in 8 decades, most of the Bahamas could be underwater, which means where are we going to go?
Right.
Where? We could be those refugees, and they could start in 50 years. I was talking to my daughter this morning. I said, when you're going to be 55, we're going to be halfway there to another half a meter rise. Now, these are obviously dire predictions, and things can change. But, that whole refugee crisis, although that is sparked by war, but initially by climate change, we could become refugees.
Well, no. And let's reframe that. We are refugees, or we already have refugees. And let me just say this, long before Dorian, right? We will never forget the impact, the size of Dorian. But let's remember that our Ragged Island brothers and sisters, right, for two reasons. It's a climate, a natural and a man-made disaster, right? And so they had to leave because of the ferocity of the storm and the fact that there wasn't sufficient or appropriate infrastructure in place. But also they weren't able to return as quickly, as easily, or in the same way because of a lack of attention to restoring infrastructure, right? And so we have historic experience with climate refugees, internal displacement.
Yeah, they were let down, and then the Abaconians feel they've been let down as well after Dorian.
They have
same issue, but bigger.
No. Yeah, y'all don't have to feel it. We know it. We have let you down. And in fact, this could be a great example, though, a great place to start to prepare for the potential future, because we know that we have already lost culture and history and language by allowing this state of affairs where people can't return, right? And I don't know, I can be honest with you, I don't know which one is more devastating, war or natural disaster. Because prior to Dorian, I would have said the war is always more devastating than the natural disaster. But Dorian sat on top of Abaco, for over 24 hours.
It's the same outcome. You have PSDD.
Yeah.
In whatever that population is, whatever it's fleeing from. And that's sad,
Yeah. And so there were a number of interesting stories that I pulled up. The first that I noted is entitled, if you want to search it, Snake Island. Ukraine says troops who swore at Russian warship are still alive. Right? And so now I want to say that both the Ukrainians and the Russians could be Bahamian. Right? It seems like it was a bit of propaganda to stir up emotions. But when I delved into the story, reports from Ukraine were that the soldiers reportedly were handled according to standard war policy protocol. The only, I think, issue was that there was a non-military, there was a civilian rescue boat, like aid and rescue, food and medicine, that was coming to the island, and contrary to international war rules, the Russian forces detained them along with the military personnel on the island. But reports are that they are being treated reasonably well and that they will be returned at a date to be determined by the Russians. But they'll be, by the Russians back to Ukraine state. So it's glad to know that they're alive. It's glad to know that it didn't go down the way that they said it went down. The Russians show up, the Ukraine say, "Boy, y'all ain't bring no collect. Go tell your mother send some collect and come back." And the Russians just shoot them down, right? Like, it's good to know that that's not happening. But then we find out that, then I find that there are Africans, people from Nigeria, people from South Africa, and several other African states who are not just complaining, but are sending out urgent calls to their embassies, because they're saying that they're being prevented from leaving the Ukraine. And I got a couple of quotes here. Osimhen from Nigeria told the BBC he had tried to get on a train in Now, how do you pronounce the name of the capital city? I could be honest, I have not been paying as much attention to the television news. I've been doing most of my stuff reading. How do you pronounce the name of the capital city?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Depends if you're Russian or Ukrainian. It probably sounds differently.
There you go. So if you're Bahamian, you
right.
expect it to not sound correct. So is it Lviv or is it Kviv? Because sometimes the L will sound like a different. Is that how they spell Kiev?
I've always heard it as Kiev.
That's what I thought. But what it was printed in everything that I saw.
I remember there's Chicken Kiev too, right?
Right, which I was like, man, you can't name the thing Nassau Conk. I don't know if I can let y'all name it Nassau Conk, you know. So one guy said that he was trying to get on a train at the Polish border and was told by the military people at the border that only Ukrainians were being allowed into Poland. Now, that's slightly different, right? That's slightly different from no Africans are being let in to the Ukraine. Because I imagine they could be at a bureaucratic level. We could be only processing Ukrainians. Any foreign nationals, whether you are from Belarus or you're from Switzerland or you're from Honduras, or you from Australia, we're not letting anybody but Ukrainians across the border. But I haven't heard those reports, right? I haven't heard reports from anyone else. It appears as if there is an issue with Africans seeking refuge in Poland and trying to leave the Ukraine generally in any direction.
Wow.
Yeah. Have you read any interesting stories coming out of this Ukraine-Russia conflict yet?
Well, I think, there's a lot to unpack. I don't think there's anyone who can claim they're an expert, but there are certainly things that have led to where we are now. I read a cable in 2018 from William Burns, who's now the director of CIA, and was then the Russian ambassador, and he wrote a cable back to the Obama administration saying his Russian colleagues had told him that if they continue, their red line is if they continue to push for Ukraine joining NATO, that the Russians would have to take a side. So they knew in 2008 how this would play out. And the only reason we know that is because Julian Assange, WikiLeaks leaked that cable. Otherwise, we would never have known that. But there are other things as well. There's I always like to go for the money. So the interesting thing is there's a pipeline. There's a Nord Stream 2 pipeline that's very tied up in this whole situation. And this is the Russian pipeline of gas to Germany. And and the U.S. have an interest in that because the U.S. is one of the largest liquid natural gas exporters in the world. 2020 saw their highest exports ever. And that pipeline, which hasn't been completed yet, would put pressure on the U.S. exports, plus also on U.S. regulatory bodies, which might say they won't allow as much drilling in the future because there is enough supply in the band. So that's been in the background, and Biden used that pipeline as a tool to leverage Russians. He dropped the sanctions on it. I don't know if you know that recently. And it was like a carrot to Putin. If you invade, this is to stop you from invading and massing. So now that's back on the table, and that actually benefits certain players. So there is money, there's always energy and other things involved in this that we're not being told about.
I was going to say, you spell, those are a lot of letters to spell resources, right? Because we know usually at the center of any conflict is resources, right? We know that Sudan became 2 countries because of resources, right? Bolivia, we still not clear whether it's coup 0.20, coup back, right? Coup return to you, because at the center of that conflict, it's really lithium.
Yeah.
Right? And so...
when you go right down to it.
Right.
I mean, there were other issues as well. When Biden got into power, we hear a lot about democracy for Ukraine, but one of the things that the president of Ukraine did was after Biden got sworn in, he actually closed down 3 pro-Russian radio stations, arrested the owners, tried them for sedition, and so on. And so it's not completely anti-democratic, and things like that must have, there was this expression, don't poke the bear, Russia being the bear. So there were little pokes going on. That was a poke, because that is to take out that Russian voice, and a third of Ukrainians are ethnic Russian speakers.
Right. I was going to say, when we did the story, when I brought to the table the story about Kazakhstan, right? And I was saying that what I found fascinating about that dynamic was the tension between old ways and new ways, right? Trying to apply a new world politic to old identities, right? Old cultural identities that were deeply entrenched in the country. And in this particular Ukraine conflict, right? Because I don't want to call it a Ukraine-Russian conflict, because I think it's far more complex than we think it is. A part of this conflict is attempting to apply new politics to old culture. And both Russia and the U.S. are guilty of it, which is why I will continue to use the term proxy and proxy war.
But, the Russians meddle as much as anyone else. I mean, if you look, I read an article about, saying how the U.S. meddled in other countries, but Russia does the same thing. It's all part of, their interests, of protecting their interests.
I would say that it's plantation model politics 2021. That's how global politics works. We're all interfering, right? There's no strong line. We're not telling you what to do. We're not demanding that you do. So we're just interfering a little bit. And so, when I stand with Ukraine, I stand with the people of Ukraine that are forced to live with the results and the consequences of a local and a global politic that refuses to acknowledge not just the environment, but the people that they are governing and how they actually live, right? And we see that happening in the Bahamas as well, where we have this centralized New Providence governance that's creating policies that are devoid, that absolutely lack any real understanding of what people are going through on the family islands, and even in small small pockets or sectors in the capital, and that's where the greatest tension sort of lies. So when I see the representative for Fox Hill and the representative for Pine Ridge, I think the Minister of Grand Bahama and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, not respectively, right? Ginger Moxie and Fred Mitchell, when I see them in Grand Bahama standing next to the winner of a local government election, right? And then I hear the local candidate, the winner saying, oh, this is a victory for the PLP. Then I say, man, look here, you're all trying to put this type of politic on this type of space. The whole reason we created local government is because we needed a different type of politic to govern a different type of space. And you all, right? And so I see those links happening right there. And so I think the lesson for us, one of the lessons for us in the Bahamas is for us to be very concerned about how we try to govern people and understanding the need to really center the citizen, center the culture of governance, how people are used to being governed and governing themselves, and then coming in with policies, as opposed to just coming in, we from Nassau and we come to show you what you're going to do.
And that's how it's been historically, all the way back to the 1800s.
Right.
It just hasn't really changed. I mean, there was a lot of talk about local government reform. Whatever happened to that? Did that ever?
Anyway. I can be honest with you.
That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, good. Because another link that you shared with me to the sort of Ukraine discussion, the Bahamas was invaded at one point by the U.S. as well, right?
Yeah, there was a war at right at the end of the Revolutionary War.
1 second.
It's a raid.
Dear Chargé Ushapitz, turn off the radio. Don't listen to this. Don't listen to this part. Because I wanted, now the Bahamas on that long list. Every once in a while, this long list of territories and countries that the U.S. has invaded pops up, and I never see the Bahamas on it. Maybe we could put ourselves on that list now. But tell us the dates of the raid again.
I think it was March 3rd and 4th, 1776.
Okay, good.
But we were a British colony then, so technically it was the Bahamas were a British colony, but there was a raid, a U.S. raid. It was repelled, and that was the end of it.
Boy, look at history repeating itself. I'm going to try Raid Adastra this weekend. I was trying to get some flamingos for birthday gifts, but
they called it an amphibious.
Yeah, mine was slightly amphibious. I got stuck in the pond. That's why I couldn't make it out with no flamingo. But listen, producer, let's go to that last caller. We're almost out of time. Caller, you got 60 seconds. You're on the clock.
Yeah, let me squeeze it in. I just learned something just now from your guest. Good morning to you guys. Erin, I wanted to squeeze this in.
Yeah, man.
Let's remember that Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. And so they failed then. And so, oppression is not going to win this one. But I just want to get in a quick comment on climate change because it seems it's futile talking sometimes on the radio. I had called Parker the other day, and so you know that I know you're familiar with what you call planetary shift. I call it orbital deviance, right? So, caller, the fact that when they first talk about climate change and Al Gore say he wanted to tax carbon, I intuitively knew it was a farce and it was about money because carbon is the source of our life. So you want to tax life and then hence put the burden on the human sheep to say us breeding is causing the problem. And so what I wanted you to explain, right, because the caller, he told Mr. Parker that I missed out the key part of the conversation, which in orbital deviance would entail exactly what he said. The Earth moving closer to the sun in the orbital deviance. Explain that to him because apparently Quincy Parker didn't know what I meant by orbital deviance, and the caller didn't know because he said I didn't mention it. He talked about the Earth moving closer to the sun. Explain to them that all of that entails orbital deviance, please.
Yeah, man, and so we're going to get to that, and I'm going to get an expert on. We're going to have this conversation. We're going to talk about this report. But you're absolutely right. What we're experiencing, and when I delved into these stories, you'll know that some of the reports and stories on the reports make a distinction between man-made and natural climate change, right? And so when we talk about orbital shift, right, and planetary shift, what we're saying is the Earth is shifting on its axis, which makes it tilt differently, which means that you see differences in climate and how climate behaves, right? So that in and of itself can be impacted by man-made events like fracking and blowing up things in the middle of the Earth. Oh, dear, humans, right? With that, it could also be volcanic activity, but volcanic activity could be spurred by fracking and other underwater explosion and incendiary devices, right? But without a doubt, 52, I'm going to bring someone on and we're going to talk about it because it's a combination of things happening. First of all, we got planetary shift where the planet is moving on its axle, causing things to happen. Then we got man-made activity is causing climate shift. And then we got this thing that's happening, right? It's called the hubris of man, where we don't realize that the climate has always been shifting. And we may just be in a shift that's not suitable for humans. And then what humans are doing on top of that is making it even worse. So we got all of these things. I'm glad that you made that point, and I can make sure, Mark, we got to have this discussion coming up hopefully next week. Oh boy, texters, I am so sorry. I'm going to record these texts and bring them on tomorrow, but you hear my producer, he got to keep me in line. We're all out of time. Thank you for tuning in to On the Clock today. Guardian Radio AM is up next. I think Quincy Parker is going to be your host today, so you're going to enjoy. Quincy Parker, plenty questions coming to you, but I know you can handle them. Thanks for bearing with us today. Thank you, Mark, for joining me for another great discussion. And come back next week. Thank you, producer. You guys have a great day. Stay tuned to Guardian Radio 96.9 FM.